Thank you. My goodness, you haven't heard the speech yet. It might not be that good. I think maybe you're just clapping that the sound was on for this side of the room over here. You know, I was really getting a little worried about the sound, and one of the reasons was I spoke at an event in Little Rock one time when I was governor. It was a big convention, and they'd all gathered in this huge banquet hall like this is tonight. And I got up to speak, and I could see people in the back of the room going like this. And I said one of the dumbest things I've ever said from a podium. I said, "Can you folks in the back hear okay?" And some guy yelled back, "No, sir, and we appreciate it, too." Peter was a very gracious introduction. I do want to say just one point of correction. You indicated I was 55 years old. I've been married for 57 years. My wife just says it feels like that. But it's actually, we've only been married 38 years, and I'm 56. We did get married when we were very young. And nobody thought it would last. And we were too poor for it not to last. So here we are, 38 years later, 3 kids and 2 grandkids. And I've got a slideshow on the grandkids that I'd like to show you. I won't do that to you tonight. Because you know what I do? I do it on my Fox News show. I show pictures of my grandkids on television. And someone asked me, I was in a plane, and they turned and said, "You know, I've watched your show, and you show pictures of your grandkids. Why do you do that?" I said, "Dude, because I can. That's why." It's like the guy that came up to a friend of his, and he said, "Hey, have I showed you the latest pictures of my grandson?" His friend says, "No, and I sure appreciate it, too." Hey, I want to say tonight what a delightful dinner we have had, and my compliments to the chef and this remarkable staff who has served us very efficiently and with great courtesy tonight, and I mean that. It's always a pleasure to go to an event where the food is edible and delicious, and they have outdone themselves, and I want to ask you to join me in saying thank you to all this great staff here. Great job. One thing for which I am grateful is that it was served at the tables and it was not a buffet. I had this thing about a buffet, and it started out because of an incident years ago when I was lieutenant governor. I was invited to speak at a big political dinner up in North Arkansas. And so I got to the event, got there a little early, surveyed the situation, realized that it was a buffet, and it was also an election year. And I figured out real quickly, having been in politics enough to know that if it is a buffet dinner and you're running for office, the smart thing to do is that you position yourself right there where people have to pick up their plate. They may not want to talk to you, but they want to eat. So you just make it so that in order for them to eat, they have to talk to you. So that's what I did. I stood there where the people were going to get their plates, and they came through, and I shook every hand and asked every single person for their vote. When everyone had gotten through the line, I looked around, I saw no one else coming, so I thought, okay, I guess it's time for me to get my plate, go to the head table, and prepare to be the keynote speaker, which that's why I was there. So I reached over to get a plate, and the young man who was working for the caterer said, "Excuse me, do you have a ticket?" I said, "Well, honestly, I don't. I didn't think I needed one. I'm the keynote speaker tonight at the banquet, and I just kind of assumed that with that came dinner." He said, "I don't know anything about that. All I know is I was told that nobody gets a plate unless they have a ticket." I said, "Well, I don't expect you to recognize me. I'm Mike Huckabee. I'm your lieutenant governor." And his eyes got all big. He says, "Oh, man, you mean you're the lieutenant governor of the whole state?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Man, that's great. I've never met a lieutenant governor before. I want to shake your hand." I said, "Well, that's great." He said, "But I still can't let you have a plate if you don't have a ticket." I could see I was getting nowhere with this kid. So empty-handed, I walked up to the head table and sat down by the chairman of the dinner, a retired FBI agent by the name of Dick Holman. And Dick looked over at me. He says, were you not hungry?" I said, "Well, Dick, I kind of was, but the kid back there told me if I didn't have a ticket, I couldn't get a plate." Well, the color just drained out of Dick's face, and You could see how humiliated, and he jumped up from his chair, and I just grabbed him by the coat, and I pulled him back down and said, Dick, first of all, you need to calm down. And secondly, just sit down. Don't worry about it. He said, no, 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 we're going to go back there. I'm going to straighten that boy out. Let's go back there. We'll get you a plate. I said, no, you're not. I'm fine. I'll get something afterwards. Don't worry about it. You're not going to go back there. Yes, we are. I said, no, you're not. You are going to leave that young man alone, and Dick, you're not going to say a word to him. He said, I don't understand. Why not? I said, Dick, that is the first teenager I've seen in a long time who did exactly what somebody told him to do. For gosh sake, leave the boy alone. So ever since then, I've had this thing about the buffet dinner. You know something funny? I didn't have a ticket to this event either. But I've often thought, here was a young man who was doing exactly what someone told him to do, and how refreshing that was. He had been given an assignment. He knew what his mission was. He carried it out without any sense of favoritism, any sense of prejudice. He simply did what he was told to do. And I wondered, what would it take to get that guy elected to Congress? Because we got a pile of them who don't seem to understand what we sent them there to do. Well, there was a little news made today, wasn't there? And I don't know if you were as stunned and shocked as I was, but I was quite confident, especially when I heard last night that John Roberts had written the majority opinion. I told my wife, well, there's one thing we can count on. It's going to get overturned. If Roberts is writing the opinion, that's a signal that it's out. I don't know if they're going to throw out the mandate or the whole thing, but Obamacare is done. And then this morning, when the first part of the announcement came out, and they were saying, yes, the Commerce Clause is in effect so that that part of the mandate would be unconstitutional. I thought, okay, that's what we all thought. I mean, that's common sense. You don't even have to go to law school to understand that the United States government cannot force you to purchase something or to spend money in order to be a citizen. My gosh, back in the South when I was a boy, we used to have the poll tax that basically kept people from voting. They couldn't exercise their citizenship without paying a poll tax. This was, in essence, the national equivalent of a poll tax. Surely there's no way the Supreme Court would ever say that it is constitutional to require of American citizens that they spend money in a private business purchasing a product in order to fully exercise their rights as a U.S. citizen. What I did not anticipate was the creativity with which the extreme court today decided that it was not the Commerce Clause that would be in effect, but they took up an issue that neither the complainants or the defendants ever brought up, which was to say, oh, no, it won't work constitutionally under the Commerce Clause, but we can just call it a tax, and then it'll be okay. And first of all, not even Obama had thought about calling it a tax. He had vehemently denied that it was, and it said repeatedly, now this is not a tax increase. Now I know that many of you here in this room tonight are very discouraged by the ruling. I look for always the silver lining in every cloud, and I found a few. For example, I think one of the silver linings is that for once, President Obama is right. For 3.5 years, he has blamed everything that has happened in his presidency on George W. Bush. Tonight, since Bush appointed Roberts, I guess for the first time he's actually right. Bush is responsible for appointing Roberts, who made this boneheaded decision. Now, quite seriously, After I got over the initial shock, as many of you perhaps have, or maybe you're not over the shock, so have another piece of pie. It'll make you feel better. The fact is, I'd rather be a Republican over the next several months than a Democrat over the next several months, because I would find it very difficult if I were running for office as a Democrat, going out there and justifying the largest single tax increase in the history of the United States at a time when we have 8.2% unemployment, we have record deficits, we have a debt that would choke the state of Texas, and we have a lowered credit rating, and we have energy prices that are substantially higher than they were 4 years ago. And we have an economy that is nowhere near getting back in the saddle. We have young people who now have 5-figure student loans that they cannot pay off because after having graduated from college, they are back home living with their parents, filing 500 applications and getting no job offers in their field. And 85% of the undergrads who graduated a year ago in May went to live with their parents after they got out of school. 85%. That might not be true at Ashland, but nationally that's true. And I'd hate to go and defend the largest ever tax increase in the history of the country in an environment like this, especially if my party had told everybody that Obamacare wasn't going to increase their cost. Because a lot of people know that you can't give more things to more people and it costs less money. You know, I may not be the smartest guy that ever got elected to something, and all my opponents thought I was pretty much the dumbest guy that ever got elected to something. But I know that you cannot add 13 million people to a program that is going to ultimately pay out on their behalf millions of dollars, and that you're going to be able to do that for less money than you once paid out, especially when you're adding unlimited benefits and you're saying that there are no pre-existing conditions. Now that's very gracious sounding, but here's what I liken it to. The whole idea that you can just walk in and say, I'd like to be insured, and you automatically have to be. Just keep in mind that if we apply that to any other form of insurance, it would really be absurd on its face. Imagine me calling up my insurance agent and saying, hey, I need to get insurance on my house. Well, okay. How big is your house? Well, right now it's not too big. You see, it burned down yesterday, and I need to rebuild it, and I'd like to get it insured. Well, what do you mean you want to get it insured? It burned down. Yeah, I know, but no pre-existing conditions on the house, right? And so what I want to do, I know the fire's already come and it's wiped my house out, but I have to go ahead and get it insured after the fact because, you know, I can't afford to build this thing back. Heck, I need the insurance. You say, well, that's ridiculous. What if I call my car insurance agent and said, I'd like to insure my car? Well, tell me what make and model you have, and tell me, you know, what you owe on it. I said, well, I guess I owe a lot on it right now because I totaled it yesterday when I was driving it. And it was my fault. And I was texting while driving, and I ran into a building and destroyed a bunch of property, but I'd sure like to get that insurance because, man, it's going to cost me a fortune to take care of all that liability. And he would say to me, but you can't insure your car after you've already had the accident and incurred the liability. I mean, heck, I'd like to just have my wife call up after I'm deceased and call the insurance agent and say, I'd like to buy $50 million of insurance on my husband. Well, what kind of health he's in? Well, he's awfully quiet today because he's dead as Elvis right now. Now, as absurd as that is, just understand there is a financial absurdity in the idea that people can walk in without any condition whatsoever and access an insurance plan in the private sector that the private sector can ever make profitable. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, actually it does. If it is your goal to get rid of the private sector in the insurance market and put everybody under the government insurance program as a single payer system, this is the fastest path to get there. Let's not kid ourselves. I don't think that the Democrats are that smart, but I don't think they're that dumb. And it occurs to me that the real big picture here was that anybody who ran the actuarial tables on this whole gimmick realized that if you couldn't just sell a single payer system, there's a back door to get there. And it's essentially to put all the private sector insurance carriers out of business, because nobody can write a policy where you have unlimited lifetime benefits, no pre-existing conditions, and you can walk in any condition of health and they are guaranteed, and no limits on the coverage that you get, and no restrictions. I'm not saying that there's not a need for a high-risk pool for people who have those conditions. But the whole idea of Obamacare was not a reform in the insurance industry, and it most certainly was not a reform in the health care field. For the fact is, we don't have a health care crisis in America. What we have in America is a health crisis. Because between 75 and 80% of all the cost of health care in this country are spent on chronic disease. Our real issue is not the lack of coverage. The issue is that there's not a blanket big enough to cover the state of health for the average American, because the average American does not run to the finish line or even walk to the finish line. The average American is drugged to the finish line, or maybe almost like propped up on the horse while dead, kind of like in the final scenes of the movie El Cid. Or for those of you who are younger, think Weekend at Bernie's. Think about this. Almost 80% of all of our healthcare expenditures are in chronic disease. And chronic disease, other than genetic factors, is largely controlled by three behaviors: overeating, underexercising, and smoking. So it's driven largely by what we do. And the idea that you're going to cover everybody does not deal with the fact that we have an unsustainable health care cost that is driven by the fact that we are living longer than we ever thought we would live, but we're not living healthier. We're able to be propped up in our unhealthy condition through the modalities of medication and outstanding health care. So I say, it is not a health care crisis we have. In this country, we have the best health care on the face of God's green earth. People, when they really get sick from anywhere in the world, don't say, honey, quick, I've just been diagnosed with a terminal disease. Get me to Cuba as quick as you can. It's get me to the United States, where the latest advances and the most innovative technologies exist to get people well. But what happens when we de-incentivize the idea of those technologies and the innovations? What happens when there is no benefit in years of research to develop a medication that'll save a person's life? What happens when we de-incentivize the idea that if you develop an incredibly expensive robotic machine that will make your recovery time a matter of hours or days instead of weeks and months, when that incentive is destroyed, who is going to make that machine? And why would they make it? Who's going to spend the years and years of research, painstakingly go through experiment after experiment, many of which will fail before they will ever succeed, to find the techniques and the technologies that will cure Alzheimer's, our cancer, our heart disease, if there's no way ever that someone will be able to get a return on the investment for having done it? We have a government that's not going to make those investments. So how's that going to happen? The greatest tragedy would be that the long-term impact would be that rather than having a enviable health care, we have an absolutely deplorable health care system at a time when we live longer, but we live sicker. And the real need in this country is not Obamacare. The real need is to change the whole system from top to bottom and have a prevention-based system rather than an intervention-based system, so that instead of building the expensive trauma center at the bottom of the hill to pick up the pieces of the people who fall off, we build a fence at the top of the hill to keep them from falling off in the first place, because preventing the illness is always less expensive than trying to treat it and trying to cure it. And that's not what this plan did. Now, I realize this tonight is not a political speech. So why on earth did you invite me, for heaven's sakes? What can I say? I used to go to civic clubs and they'd always say, now look, this is a civic club. 2 topics we don't talk about: religion and politics. And I'd say, I'm a Baptist minister turned politician, and you want me to do what? Folks, I can tell you it was a very difficult thing when I made the transition from the world of the nonprofit and the church world and ran for office a little over 20 years ago for the first time. And I'll never forget that people really were confused by all that. One lady came up to me, she says, sir, now is it true that you were a Baptist minister? I said, yes, ma'am, that is correct. She said, well, let me ask you something. Are you one of those narrow-minded Baptists who think only Baptists are going to heaven? I said, oh, no, ma'am, not me. No, actually, I'm more narrow than that, because I don't think all the Baptists are going to make it myself. Methodists love that joke. They love that. Now, this happened to me. I was in the little town of Malvern, Arkansas, which is a small town, and in Arkansas, every little town has their festival every summer. And it depends on what your community is known for or what it does, what it's famous for. That's what the festival is built around. My hometown, Hope, Arkansas. You think it was known for the birthplace of Bill Clinton? No, it was known, and still is, as the watermelon capital of the world, because the world's largest watermelons are consistently grown there. The world record, 295-pound watermelon grown there. Don't laugh, it's a pretty big watermelon. I bet you haven't grown one in Ohio, 295 pounds. So they have a watermelon festival. In Clarksville, Arkansas, they have a peach festival because they have peach trees. In Atkins, Arkansas, they have a pickle festival because they have a pickle plant. Makes sense? Malvern, they have the brick festival because they have a brick plant. Folks, you are living in a small town when you celebrate a brick, okay? What y'all do in your town? We celebrate bricks. Fortunately, they don't have a brick throwing at politicians portion of the festival, but I was there one time early in my political life, and I had been elected lieutenant governor. I was running for re-election. I was out on the town square, which is kind of where all the politicians would hang out, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. And a lady got right up in my face and started shaking her finger in my face and telling me, she says, I just want you to know that I did not vote for you and I would never vote for you. I don't think people like you ought to get involved in politics. And sir, I wouldn't vote for you under any circumstances. I would not vote for you if you were St. Peter. I said, lady, that's fine, because if I were St. Peter, you wouldn't be in my district. I know some of you think that's a little rude, but I had already decided she was an undecided voter, wasn't leaning my way anyhow, so. Now, it's hard not to talk politics on a day like today. I realize that the real purpose of this dinner is to celebrate this great country, and particularly and specifically to celebrate the extraordinary efforts that are being made at the Ashbrook Center to train some of America's finest minds to be the leaders for the future. But after today, I'm thinking maybe we ought to let them lead now and not wait too much longer, because the kind of thoughtful education that they are receiving here on this campus means that we don't need fewer of them, we need more of them, and we don't need them later, we really do need them now. And I want to say thank you. Thank you to all of those who have made generous contributions so that the Ashbrook Center can continue to recruit, to train, to develop, and to send forth young Americans, young patriots, who value our constitutional form of government and believe that it is worth protecting, preserving, and passing on to the next generation. And how refreshing it is that there would be a school that unapologetically believes that our constitutional form of government is worth defending, and that it is the greatest experiment of government in the history of mankind, and that it was the result of some extraordinary men of courage who got on their knees in deep, thoughtful prayer and then came to their feet to put their signatures to a document that would declare their independence from their mother country. And in so doing, simply didn't sign a document so that they could get their taxes lowered. They signed a document knowing that if this experiment in government did not work out, they would pay not only with their own blood, they knew they would pay with the blood of their own children. Rarely has the world seen such raw courage as what we saw from these who started this great land of ours. Men who took muskets off their mantle, better suited for varmint hunting than fighting a war against the best trained, best equipped, best financed army in the history of mankind, and yet that's exactly what they were willing under God to do, because they believed that their freedom was worth more than even their very lives. They valued liberty. They valued the idea that they could think for themselves and speak for themselves and assemble as where they wanted to and worship as they wanted to. And if they didn't want to worship, they would not be arrested. They'd be talked about in church, but they would not be arrested. That they would be able to write what they wished to write. And that, yes, they could even criticize their own government and not be shot for it. Do you realize what an incredible just gift from God it is to live in a country where you can get up, even at this podium, and say what you wish about your court, your Congress, the executive branch, and do it without fear that it will be the last night of your life, because your government will prohibit you and forbid you for criticizing it. Because we have an unusual form of government in that we don't elect people to be our bosses. We elect them to be our servants. We, the people, are the bosses. We do not work for them. They really do work for us. Oh yes, they forget it. I think they forgot it today. But we have the power to remind them. It's called an election. It's a powerful thing, an election. And the only time when it does not work is when the citizens whose lives and whose liberties are at stake decide that it does not matter. God help us and God forgive us should we ever come to the place of complacency in this country where we would forego our right to speak, to be informed, and to vote, because when that happens, we have given over to whatever they, the politicians, would wish to do. And then politics truly will become politricks, which is what I fear has happened in our culture today. Far too many just decide that it's not worth the effort. And so it is the trickery of those in power rather than a sense of servanthood. The saving of this great republic is an urgent matter. And I believe that the very survival of our republic is at stake, not just in this election, but in our lifetime and in our generation. And when I was governor, I used to go to a lot of schools and talk to kids, and I would walk in the room and they say, "Our governor is here, he's going to talk to you about government." And you could just see kids' eyes glaze over. I mean, I never walked into a classroom or to a student assembly in which I thought the kids were saying, "Oh boy, the governor is here. Isn't that delightful?" It was like, oh no. The only thing they appreciated is if they were getting out of a math test. Other than that, they loathed the idea that I was even there. So what I learned was that if I wanted to get their attention, the first thing I would do is say, how many of you here are interested in politics? Well, even if a kid was, he was never going to admit it in front of his classmates, so not a hand went up. And there was giggling, because they thought, wow, we got you in your place. And then I would say, oh, that's so good. I'm so glad to see that you guys don't care about politics. That is a big relief to me. Then they started listening. And I said, I know you thought that I was hoping you were interested, but truly I'm not, because you see, if you get interested in politics, you make my job a lot harder. Because as long as you're not interested in politics, you don't pay any attention to what we're doing down there at the Capitol, and you're never going to vote because you don't think it's important, whew, you make it easier for me. Because as long as you feel that way, I can do anything I want to, and there's nothing you can do about it. I said, you see, I want to tell you the dirty little secret of politics. Politicians really don't work for the people. We say we do, but we don't. We work for the voters. The voters are the ones who hire us, and only the voters can fire us. The people, whoever they are, who don't participate, who don't care about politics like you guys, well, they don't hire me and they can't fire me. So I just wanted you to know how delighted I am that you're not interested in politics, because here's some things we've been talking about down at the Capitol that we ought to try to do. Did it go out? Is this your way of telling me I'm done? Hand me that one, I'll sing. No, I won't either. Oh, say, can you see? All right. Will this one work? Ah! Batteries aren't that expensive, guys. We can... Peter just said I'm done. I knew that before I started, Peter. So I said to these students, I said, there's some things we've been thinking about down at the Capitol. For example, we're thinking about that we're going to make it so that you can't get a driver's license until you're 25. And of course, immediately the whole assembly went nuts. What? No, no. I said, yeah, you know, we think it's a great idea because most of the accidents happen with 16 to 19-year-olds. So if we can get rid of you guys driving, it means a lot fewer accidents, and that's just better for everybody. So we're going to raise the age to get a driver's license to 25. Another thing we're thinking about is that we're going to make it so that in order to date, you have to be accompanied by one or more parents until you're at least 27 years old, because, you know, sexually transmitted disease, teen pregnancy, it is a real issue, and so this will help take care of that. Chances are you won't do a whole lot with your parents in the back seat of the car. And of course, they start screaming at this point. And then I say, and another thing too, we've the drinking age to 30, so that, and by this time they're screaming at me. And they're all totally focused. And that's when I say, you know, I thought you guys didn't care about politics. I guess you are after all, aren't you? Because the fact is, politics is the process by which every one of those things I just mentioned could happen if nobody said a word. If nobody speaks up and nobody stands up, that's what can happen. And folks, I want to tell you tonight, it's a message that I hope you don't think is just applicable to a group of high schoolers in some school where their eyes glaze over when the governor shows up. Because I really feel that the great challenge to America is not an incompetence or an indifference on the part of those who serve in Washington. It is an indifference and an incompetence on those of us who put them there in the first place and who don't get off our hands, get on our feet, and demand accountability for a government that's supposed to be about we the people. This year is an important year in this country, and even if you have a totally different point of view than me, I don't know why in the world you would be here tonight if you did, but maybe somebody told you this was the Kiwanis Club. I don't know. But even if you have a viewpoint 180 degrees from me, with all due respect, that's fine. America's big enough for your view and mine to both live in this country, and I fully respect that. But I believe with all my heart, for those of us who believe that this nation has not just a money problem, but a moral problem, that our issues are not just that we've turned our back on our Constitution, but we've turned our back on the Creator God, and we have forsaken understanding who we are as a country and how we got here, because as I look back on our history, there is no explanation for the existence and the preservation of this country outside of the providence of the Almighty Creator Himself having intervened. Because if you think back, those early founders who stood against the magnificence of the British Army and did so without the resources, the training, the experience, and the equipment, had to have had more on their side than those rusty muskets that they reached for off their mantles. There must be something about this country that is beyond that. And I believe that those of us who understand Americans' origins will also understand our future. And we will lose the future of America, not because we elect the wrong people, but because we forsake the God who gave His grace to empower us in the first place. Nobody in this country is required to believe in Him. Nobody in this country is required to worship Him. Nobody in this country is required to pay tithes or to go to one of His churches. But everybody in this country should be grateful to Him, because without Him, we would not be, and we most certainly would not be, the exceptional nation that we are, have been, and hope to be if we maintain our humility before Him. And that's why tonight I say that our great hope is not simply in the leaders that we elect or the ones we throw out. It is in our assuming the responsibility for protecting, for preserving, and for passing on this great nation to the next generation. You see, I believe that the purpose we have on this planet as human beings is not only to create the next generation, but it's to train them to be our replacements and encourage them to be better at it than we were. I come as the product of parents who were part of what we often call the greatest generation. And you know, really, they truly were the greatest generation. The parents like mine and like many of yours who came through the Great Depression, and they came through a world war, and from that they were determined that their kids would have a better life than they ever would. And they made extraordinary sacrifices, and they put their kids on their shoulders to let them see a future that was better than the past that they had experienced through the horrors of the Depression and through the bloodshed and the pain and the deaths of a world war. And they wanted for us a better life. And in a most remarkable way, they got to see it happen. They wanted their kids to earn more and to learn more. And many of us in this room tonight have achieved things our parents only hoped and dreamed of. In my life, I am the first male in my entire family lineage to even graduate from high school, much less go to college. Many of you here are first-generation college graduates. Some of you, like me, first-generation high school graduates. My mother lived in a time in the Depression where she lived in a shanty of a house with dirt floors and no electricity. I am one generation away from abject poverty. I know from where I have come. And my parents wanted for me a life that was better than the life they ever lived. And because they sacrificed themselves and their comforts and their hopes and their dreams for my sister and me, they deserve to be called the greatest generation. And God help us who have been the recipients of the greatness of their generosity and their sacrifice if we, in turn, having taken the sacrifice of our parents, turn and sacrifice our children so that we do not have to pay the price and suffer the consequences of a life of indulgence that we have experienced. And that's why the idea of a $17 trillion debt is not just a matter that is unfortunate, it is a matter that is immoral. We are sinning against the future generations of young Americans when we sacrifice them for our own sense of importance and value. And the only way we fix that is to get on our faces, ask God's forgiveness for our selfishness, for our pride, for our indifference, and having fully repented of the sins against the generations before us and the sins against the generations coming after us, we get to our feet and we vote and we take the stand and we bring our country back to sanity. What happened today in the Supreme Court was not the end of anything. What I believe it could in fact be is the beginning of the great awakening in this country, where we realize that if we sit complacently, we have what we deserve. But if we act like the patriots and the Americans that God intended us to be, we will have awakened that sleeping giant, and we will get this country back, and the children who come after us will be able to thank us rather than curse us. When my daughter graduated from college in 2004, she landed a job in Washington. It was going to be her first job, and she was all excited. And before I sent my little girl off to go to work in Washington, at the Department of Education, we went out to a ball game, and we just wanted to spend some dad and daughter time together. And so we got to an Arkansas travel game, AA minor league team, and we were sitting out there. Weren't many people there, so we had lots of room. We were chatting, watching the game, and just spending some time. A little boy came down. It was souvenir bat night, and he had that little souvenir bat in his hand. And he walked up to me with that bat in his hand. He said, "Sir, are you really the governor?" Now, when a kid's got a bat in his hand, you're not sure if you want to answer that. So I looked around, and I thought, I bet his mother sent down here to clobber me. I must have made her mad with something. I said, "Well, yes, son, I am." He said, "Oh, that's neat. I want you to, my mother said you were the governor, and would you sign my bat?" I was signing his bat, and just to make some chat with him, I said, "Well, tell me, how old are you and where you go to school?" Well, he started telling me his life story. Boy's 6 years old, just finished the first grade, and he was all excited. He said, and I just lost a tooth, too. And he showed me the big gap in front of his face. And I said, "Yeah, did you put that under your pillow? I used to do that. Did you do that?" He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Really? Well, what's the going rate for a tooth these days? How much money did you get under your pillow the next day?" He said, "I got $10. My reaction was like yours. I said, $10 for a tooth? I said, "Son, when I was your age, I was lucky if I got a quarter." To which he looked at me and he says, "Man, you got rained on." I'd never heard that expression before, but I could figure out what he meant. Ladies and gentlemen, may I just say to you tonight that we need to ask ourselves whether or not we're willing to fight for this country's future, or whether or not we're going to settle for getting rained on. As Joshua said, "I can't make this decision for you. Far be it from me to impose it upon you. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and we will fight for the greatness of this great United States of America." May God bless her and you. Thank you very much. It's been an honor and joy to be with you tonight. Thank you. Just when you thought you were safe, Peter asked me if I'd answer a couple of questions, which I'd be glad.
We're running short on time, but a couple of questions that I thought you might be willing to take a shot at. Who do you think is the logical pick for vice president for Mr. Romney as a running mate?
You know, I think he's got a lot of choices. One, maybe your own Senator Rob Portman, who would be a very fine choice, but Marco Rubio would be a great choice. I think that there are a number of people that he could choose from. Here's what I'm confident of. He will make a very thoughtful and I think methodical decision, much like he would make a decision that he would in business. The one thing I do know about Mitt Romney is that he thinks like a business guy would think. And he will analyze all the data and the information from every angle possible. And I think he will make a very, again, cerebral decision rather than a visceral one. He's not just going to wake up one day and say, oh, I feel like. I think he's going to very thoughtfully go through the process, and he will be able to justify and present a running mate that will be a good fit for him and a great choice for the country. And I'm very confident that as Republicans, we're going to be very pleased with that choice.
Thank you. The next question is on Obamacare. Given what the Supreme Court did today, how do you think the Republicans across the board, President, Senate, House campaigns, what should they run on? Should they run against Obamacare, against, I think the writer says, unwound it, to take it apart? Is that what they should do?
Well, I think what Republicans need to remind people is not that there are some elements of Obamacare that sound wonderful. I think they ought to run against the fact that the cost is going to be absolutely impossible to achieve. They ought to remind people every day that this is the largest tax increase in the history of the country. And ask them, do you believe you can absorb the largest tax increase that we've ever had in this country? Are you prepared to pay that? I don't think there's a thinking person in the country who says, oh yeah, you know what, my taxes are so doggone low, I mean, I'm getting a real deal here. Now maybe there's somebody like that, but I don't think so. And I think we've got to remind people that when we were little, we all wanted a pony. How many of you wanted a pony when you were a little kid? What's wrong with the rest of you? You don't like ponies? I was in everybody wanted a pony, but you know what? I never got a pony, ever. I never got a pony. Why not? Because we couldn't afford a pony at my house. Even if somebody gave us the pony, we couldn't have afforded to fed the thing, so we never had a pony. Would I like to see everybody have new cars and 10,000 square foot homes with maid service provided by the federal government? That'd be sweet, but who's going to pay for it? Nobody can. And that's the point we have to remind people. It's not that we are against health care, not that we are against people having access to it. We want a system that is affordable. We want one that makes sense. And the first thing to do is to start with a system in which the health care coverage that we do have is personal and portable. The problem we have is we have a third-party system that is neither personal nor portable. It's owned by your employer, and it stays with your employer. You move, you lose your job, you take a different job, you lose your insurance because it stays there. You don't do that with your car insurance, your health insurance, your life insurance or your home insurance. Why should you do it with your health insurance? You ought to own that health insurance. You decide how much coverage you want, how much you can afford, and how much you're willing to risk. Why don't you do that with your health care? That's how it ought to work. And it should be portable. It goes with you because you own it. And because you own it, you understand what you're actually paying. When the person who pays the bill and the person who creates the bill are both someone other than you, it does not end well. Folks, this is not hard to figure out for me. And so that's the kind of reforms Republicans do need to be talking about, not just what we're against. We need to be talking about what we're for. My big frustration with my own party is that we are real good about being against Obamacare. We have not been like we ought to be in putting forth a very sensible, common sense plan that people can say, yeah, that makes sense. And that's what we do need to do.
Two more questions.
Okay.
The first one is on illegal immigration. What would you do about it, if anything?
The key thing is nothing works at all until you seal the border and you actually know who's coming in. Everything else is just noise. We can talk about how we deal with the people who are here and what we do with the students, and I understand all those are important issues, but the one thing that has to happen before any American has any confidence in their government dealing with this is that we actually secure our borders, not to shut people out, but to screen people so that those that we either need, want, or are not a threat to us are able to get in without the kind of years and years of bureaucracy that it currently requires. Why would a person come through the legal way when that takes years, when paying a few $100s can get you across the border in the middle of the night tonight? We almost act like we're surprised that we have a problem. Really? If I lived anywhere on the face of the earth, I'd be trying to get here. I don't blame people for coming to this country, legally or illegally. I don't blame them. I blame an incompetent government that doesn't know how to control its own borders. Folks, every night of my life, I get on my knees and I thank God I'm in a country people are trying to break into, not a country they're trying to break out of. That is a good thing about America, but we ought to have the good sense to say we know who's coming, why they're coming, where they're going, what they're going to be doing, and if they have a communicable disease. If we don't know that, then shame on us for not knowing. And that's the beginning of anything dealing with immigration.
One more question, which will be a softball, so don't panic. I can see that you're nervous up there.
Yes.
This is a statement from a person in the audience. That I want to thank you for hosting Huckabee every week. I watch it religiously. You're intelligent, thoughtful. I always learn something from you, and you try to be funny. Thank you. Okay, here.
What can I say to that other than whoever that is an incredibly thoughtful, intelligent, good-looking, and I hope very wealthy person. That's all I can say. God bless you, whoever you are. And it was not my wife, because she would never say those things about me. I know that for sure. Peter, thank you.
You mean the wife you've been married to for 50, how many years?
As I said, she thinks it feels like 57.
Thank you very much for coming.
God bless you guys. Thank you very, very much.